I remember, I don't know, a few weeks ago, I was texting with you, and you were, and I tried to send you an image, and it wasn't loading because you were using airplane Wi-Fi,
Mhm.
and because you were on your way to go to Florida for a podcast. Was that the PBD thing?
Yeah, they're based in Fort Lauderdale. So I was on a flight on the way there. Didn't really know what to expect, but it was an interesting experience. Very friendly environment, considering it's definitely a conservative or right wing show. But they were all super kind, and we got into a lot of different topics. But what really took a lot of attention, or got a lot of attention, was the debate at the tail end of that conversation about what's currently happening in Gaza.
Yeah, and yeah, people should watch the whole thing. I mean, the whole thing, honestly, at least what I watched of it, which was some stuff around then, and a little bit before the Gaza part, and then some of the Gaza stuff is, uh, I mean, if nothing else, I'm sure, like, because some of the things some of these guys think are, very, very right wing. I mean, they're being friendly about it, but like, it's sort of, I'm sure people watching this, um, have people in their lives who might say some of these things sometimes, and they just have no idea what to say in response. So I think a lot of it's kind of a masterclass in how to just sort of, very calmly talk people down from certain things. It's like, okay, all right, well, yeah, no, yeah, okay, I'm not sure I agree with everything there, but here's the point I would make. It's like it's like, whatever. I think it's like actually legitimately useful for that purpose. I think especially the thing about like political violence. Just
Right. Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I feel like with a lot of the big news items that have been breaking in recent years, I'm learning more and more about what my moral compass is,
yeah,
and it's definitely anti-violence. And so that kind of guided me through the Israel Gaza story as well, beginning with what happened on October 7th, because
yeah,
while, historically speaking, you look at our content over the years in regard to what's happening to Palestinians, we've been very critical of the Israeli government,
yeah.
but that doesn't in any way justify terrorist acts committed by Hamas against Israeli civilians. And so, I was a little shocked to see
Sure.
people providing cover for Hamas. I think that, look, both it's immoral, okay, to do
Yep.
that, but it's
Yep.
also tactically incredibly stupid. And I knew
Oh,
what it was going to lead to. It was going to lead to what we're seeing today in Gaza, with the absolute brutal aerial bombardment that will not stop. All of these innocent Palestinian civilians dying. It's awful all around. If anyone thought that Hamas inched Palestinians closer to freedom, they're sadly mistaken.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
totally. I mean, this is something. I mean, this is something we talked about on the show on 10/9, and I think that honestly, I think a big part of the problem is that a lot of people, certainly people who support Israel and what it's doing, but also even a lot of people who might have some better intentions, who might have who might be very critical of this, when they start thinking about the Middle East, when they start thinking about Israel Palestine, they sort of default to thinking in terms of like ethnic hive minds, like like that there's something that like there's this entity called like the Palestinians that's like doing things as like as a unit, and it's like, no, they're like
No.
millions of people, and there's like Hamas and Fatah, which are different factions that control to one extent or another, never completely, like different bits of territory. Other factions don't control any territory. Lots of people who disagree with both of them. Lots of, it's like that's, that why would that be how any of this works? But I mean, like the sort of pro-Israel version of that is, oh, the Palestinians did this, so let's go kill them all. And then the anti-Israel version of it is well, I'm not going to judge anything the Palestinians do because of all the um apartheid and repression and everything. And it's like, well, no, but there is nothing that the Palestinians do. There's stuff, I mean, when we talk about the Israelis doing something or the Americans doing something, we're talking about the Israeli or the American state doing it.
Right.
But there,
Right.
there is no Palestinian state, right? So
that's such a good point, because, you know, there are some Israelis and some Zionist Jewish members of our audience who, when we started to become a little more critical toward Israel after Israel's response, they were pretty outraged by it, and they tried to make it seem as though Hamas carried out what the Palestinians wanted them to carry out. And I said, I'm like, listen, I just want you to think about it in our context. Like, don't get upset and angry. Like, I didn't get upset and angry. I just tried to reason with these members of our audience by saying, I would personally hate to think that the global community looks at the actions of our government and automatically assumes that the actions that they carry out are the actions that the entirety of the American electorate wants and demands. In fact, oftentimes, especially when you look at the polling in regard to the majority of Americans wanting a ceasefire, and you see the Biden administration completely ignoring that and carrying out what they want to carry out anyway, it would be wrong to make the assumption that Americans are behind the U.S. government and how it is helping Israel right now. So,
and that's America, where we actually have regular elections.
Exactly. In the Gaza Strip, I mean, more than half the population in Gaza right now wasn't even born in 2006 when that election took place, when Hamas was elected. Obviously, after that, Hamas did not allow for any other elections. So it's not like they were under any kind of democratic rule. And I think that point either doesn't get made or gets completely lost in the vast majority of coverage on this issue, because you'll have various officials from the Israeli government repeat over and over again, well, the Palestinians elected Hamas. The Palestinians elected Hamas. I mean, that's not quite true, because the people who currently live there did not.
Yeah. I mean, even in 2006, I don't think they got an outright majority. I think there was a plurality. But and then, as you say, half the population is under 18 now, or a little over half. So just definitionally couldn't have voted. And obviously not everybody votes, I mean, even in Australia, where it's legally mandatory, not everybody votes, right? Like, that's certainly, as far as I know, right, nobody was making anybody vote in 2006, or at least that's not something I've ever heard. So a plurality of whoever voted 18 years ago before, half or a slight majority of the population there was even born, voted for Hamas. So, honestly, that's much less of a democratic mandate than say, Donald Trump got, that they have he got about half of the voters, to vote for him both times. Then even, Likud in Israel, has that, that at least they and other right-wing parties got enough votes to, be able to form a majority coalition. And of course, it's the same reasoning in both cases, right? That it's that, like, this sort of very thing. It's like, well, okay, it's perfectly okay to engage in the sort of mass killings the IDF is doing in Gaza right now because they voted for Hamas, is exactly the same reasoning used to say, well, it's perfectly okay for Hamas to target Israeli civilians because, that's, because they approve of this. This is what they did, like, this is their government, whatever, I mean, this is, or, whatever. It's perfectly okay for Al Qaeda to target, Americans en masse because there's, because it's, America is a democracy, and and look at all these crimes that the American government has committed, which, I mean, it's a stupid argument in every case, but it's like, it maybe makes the least sense in Gaza out of any of those.
Right. Exactly. Absolutely. And it's just frustrating because that faction of, I think it's fair to say, the left, right? That faction of the left. And I think it's a small faction, but nonetheless, the ones who came out and immediately, without even acknowledging the brutality and the injustice that innocent civilians suffered as a result of that Hamas attack. Like, the fact that they provided cover now has created this opportunity for hardliners, pro-Israel hardliners, to just lump us all together and conflate that contingent with, I think, more reasonable people like us who actually do want peace and do not support Hamas and want to find a real solution.
You know, it's a little bit complicated because I do, you know, a lot of people for, you know, for their own reasons, you know, want to like exaggerate the prevalence of it. Since obviously it's like a huge propaganda gift to them, which is one of the reasons
Totally.
it was really stupid for
Yeah.
people to say things like this in the first place,
Yep.
because that was so predictable. But you know, even though it was really exaggerated, it was a real thing. I mean, I saw it. We talked about it in the show on 10/9, that there were people who had this reaction to 10/7 that is, you know, that's like I, I think
I think look,
yeah,
I just have to say, I think that
yeah,
faction of the left is so toxic
yeah,
for the broad left in so many different ways. So
yeah,
obviously on this issue, they gave the Israeli government a massive gift, and
yep,
you know, even US officials a massive
yep,
gift by giving them various examples to again lump in all people who are concerned about the life and dignity of Palestinians, just basically lump them in with these Hamas apologists. And I do agree with you. I think it's a small group of people,
yeah,
but it's just amazing to me that they have in their mind like a hierarchy of humanity, right? Or a
uh-huh,
hierarchy of issues. So uh, during the Me Too era, they took it very seriously. Rape, sexual misconduct, sexual harassment in the workplace, these things are all wrong. We want to shed a light on them. But then in this instance, you know, you see, you know, you can tell that these women, these Israeli civilians, had been raped. Like one of them who was being, you know, forced into a truck by Hamas had the backside of her pants just absolutely covered in blood. And
yeah,
it's like, oh, all of a sudden rape not really that
yeah.
concerning
I
because
mean, there was
it's inconvenient to be concerned about it in this context according to their ideology. It's just so gross.
yeah, I mean, there was a point
Yeah.
where that was the issue, to the point where, you know, as we discussed in the past, I mean, some pretty dubious stuff, you know, got like you know, sort of blown up to a point that it, you know, that it shouldn't have been. And then you have like kind of the clearest example in the world. And that doesn't count because, you know, I think there's some people who, you know, honestly, I think if you're, the way you relate to politics has to do with certain kinds of like news cycles and who's getting mad at who about what when, you know, that you know, I think one of the things that leads to is this kind of monomania. You can only fit one issue in your head at the same time. And
Totally.
so yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. You know, I also think that it was the dumbest thing in the world to sort of water down the principle that like this kind of shining bright like taboo, that it's like, no, there's absolutely no justification ever for killing civilians, at just the moment where anybody with half a brain knew that like within 12 hours you were going to start getting many more Palestinians, civilians killed, and you know, presumably you'd want to protest that. And so, but you know, you've thrown away a lot of your credibility for doing that, right? If it's just if you can't do it on the basis of, no, it's just always wrong to kill civilians no matter what, right? If the only basis you're doing it is, I've got this larger view of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that like, which, you know, whatever, so do I, right? I'm sure we'll talk about that, but like, that's, you know, that's not what's going to move people. That's not what has moved most people, because frankly, most Americans don't have an in-depth knowledge of like Middle Eastern geopolitics, right? I mean, that's the fact that, as you referred to earlier, there are all these polls showing that most Americans do want a ceasefire, I think is less a sort of reaction to kind of a more comprehensive understanding of like of the lead up of this overall situation of the Palestinians, than just a sort of very natural human reaction to the kind of images that are coming out of Israel-Palestine right now, where people see all kinds of atrocities going on and say, oh, that's horrible. They should stop shooting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, it's you can hold two thoughts in your mind at the same time, and they're not conflicting thoughts. I think they're very consistent thoughts. On one hand, you can find it absolutely ludicrous, unacceptable, and deserving of punishment toward Hamas for what they carried out on October 7th, while also simultaneously, as I've been,
Yeah.
feel very critical and be very critical in regard to how Israel has responded and reacted to it. Now, look, the thing that's really getting under my skin is the genocide denialism. I get that people hear that word and they immediately think, oh, that goes too far.
Right.
Except, what does genocide mean to you? Like, those who are naysayers, what exactly does it mean to you? When Israel blocks fuel from getting into the Gaza Strip and leads to a situation in which every single hospital is now non-functional, non-operational, when 1.5 million people are internally displaced, forced to evacuate their homes, when refugee camps are bombed, not once, not twice, but repeatedly, when hospitals are bombed repeatedly, when we keep hearing the same BS talking point about how, oh, golly gee, what could we have done? We had to do this aerial bombardment. We had to repeatedly bomb refugee camps and hospitals because Hamas is using them as human shields. No, we can't provide any evidence, and we won't provide any evidence of that. But we're just going to keep saying that over and over again while pretending like we are concerned about civilians and while pretending like we're doing what we can to minimize civilian lives. I'm sorry, I don't believe the IDF. You know, you have this pressure for US media to avoid reporting the death toll in Gaza because, oh, Hamas controls Gaza and you can't believe anything that comes out of Gaza because of Hamas. Are we supposed to just believe everything that comes out of the IDF or the Israeli government? Oh, we're just supposed to take what they say at face value. No, I refuse. And even if there's evidence that, you know, Hamas is operating in the tunnels underneath these hospitals and these refugee camps and all these various places that have been bombed repeatedly. Okay, so where is the red line? Is there a red line? If there's like 2,000 people sheltering at a hospital, looking for safety, fleeing for their lives, doing what they can to stay alive, but you suspect that there might be a Hamas militant in the tunnels under the hospital, do you bomb the hospital? So far, Israel has shown us, yes, we bombed the hospital. And we're supposed to give them a round of applause in addition to an additional $14.3 billion in American military funding. No, I refuse. I think it's ridiculous. So what does genocide mean to people? I really want to understand, because when Turkey carried out their genocide against the Armenians, they slaughtered 1.5 million people. Okay. Currently, there's at least 1.5 million Palestinians internally displaced. The conditions there are literally unlivable. Intentionally so. They've been made unlivable by the Israeli government. So, like, do we have to wait for every Palestinian to be slaughtered for people to accept what's being carried out right now? It's infuriating to me.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about the Gaza Ministry of Health is also just kind of amazing because the Gaza, Hamas has run the Gaza Strip to the extent that they do. We'll talk about that too. Since 2006, Gaza Ministry of Health numbers have been taken as reliable before. It's just like suddenly now it's like, oh, you can't trust that because it's the Ministry of Health within like a government that's ultimately run by Hamas. If anything, I think there are probably good reasons to think that it's the Gaza Ministry of Health is undercounting it, because it seems like they've been pretty careful about waiting until there are actually bodies. The initial the hospital bombing, that's like the one hospital bombing that anybody who's okay with all of this seems to want to talk about. There's this claim that there's Palestinians had said that there were 500 people who died there, but really it just like dinged up the parking lot a little bit, and it's like, well, no, the thing, there was actually, I saw, Nate Silver of all people, who's not exactly a radical leftist, sharing an article about this a while ago. One, it's not Gaza Ministry of Health numbers, like their like official tally. They have there was a doctor who'd used the word casualties in, or the Arabic equivalent of it in the way that it's often used to mean dead plus injured, right? And
Mm.
he'd said 500, which is actually probably a low ball. And the U.S. government estimates between 1 and 300 people died in that particular incident. So when you add it up to the injuries, that's probably more, like it's probably much more than 500. But the thing that's particularly amazing to me, and we'll get into your, like the PBD discussion, some of that back and forth. But like the thing that's particularly amazing to me about this is that I see all of these Westerners, all of these Americans, all these British people who are sort of repeating on zombie autopilot from previous
Totally.
wars,
Yep.
all of these claims that's like, oh no, they're actually being super careful about minimizing civilian deaths. But then so many Israeli officials are actually saying exactly the opposite of that.
100%. Yep. Yeah.
That
I mean, here, I have
yeah,
examples. I'll
yeah,
pull them up right now because it's amazing to me how like they pretend one thing and then you hear comments like this. So this is from Patrick Kingsley's reporting in the New York Times. I've shared this multiple times on the Young Turks. Some Israeli hardliners advocate keeping control of Gaza and permanently expelling its Palestinian residents. That's ethnic cleansing. A Likud lawmaker, Ariel Kalner, has called for another Nakba that would overshadow the original mass displacement of 1948. Right now, one goal, Nakba, Kalner said on October 8th, Nakba in Gaza and Nakba to anyone who dares to join, he added. A far-right government minister, Amishay Aliyahu, said on Wednesday that Gazan land should be given to former Israeli soldiers who fought in Gaza or to former Israeli settlers who lived in the enclave before Israel withdrew from it in 2005. Then he said that Israel should consider dropping a nuclear bomb on Gaza. I mean, so if they did drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza,
would
okay,
that count?
would that count as genocide, or is it anti-Semitic to say that? Because that's the other thing, right?
Right.
Israel has cried wolf so many times, and it was intentionally meant to shut up any individual who found their treatment of Palestinians deplorable, whoever pointed to the IDF's military actions as war crimes, they would just immediately get labeled anti-Semites so they can be silenced, basically. Either people won't take them seriously or listen to their arguments, or, I mean, think about it. Being called anti-Semitic, that is something that could potentially destroy your life, get you
Sure.
fired. It was a form of intimidation. But guess what? That tactic has been used so many times throughout history that people are just like, no, not buying it anymore. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and it gets like particularly absurd, I think, this time around because because the scale, not that there hasn't been stuff like this going on for a long time, but I think because the scale right now is so bad that you have all of these these mass protests that you can claim, oh, everybody there just like loves Hamas, but they have but there is like this really visible Jewish presence at like every single one of them, and say, okay, well, maybe they're all just like self-hating, anti-Semites, but like this is the whole thing starts to. In fact, I saw The Intercept just had something about where they were like tracking down the ADL's list of anti-Semitic incidents. They're like, hey guys, you're counting in your list of anti-Semitic incidents protests that were actually organized by progressive Jews, right? I mean, something has gone wrong here.
Right. Look, the point is you're not allowed to criticize the Israeli government. You have to support everything the Israeli government does, even if it is clear, and to me, it is clear that they are not being delicate or careful when it comes to the lives of Palestinian civilians. It is very clear to me that they do not care about the lives of Palestinians. It is very clear to me that they want to push Palestinians out of Gaza, whatever remains or how many remain after this,
Yep.
aerial bombardment finally ends. They want to push them to Egypt. I mean, there was an Israeli government document that they confirmed. They said, yes, this is a real document. This isn't made up. They were planning on pushing Palestinians into Egypt and just taking over Gaza.
Yeah, and the way that this goes is you say, okay, well, the person, who prepared that plan, sure, granted, they have like a cabinet position, but it's not like one of the most important cabinet positions, and they didn't they haven't actually adopted the plan. Like we keep hearing all of this, like really amazing, how like what you would count as evidence of genocidal intent, which, by the way, in the sort of certainly the classic recent examples, you have to infer intent from actions, right? Like when it comes
Yes.
to things like, the Bosnian genocide, for example, right? Like most of these things, you have to, like, you can, like, a big part of the case is, well, they clearly wouldn't do X, Y, and Z, right? If that wasn't, their intent. And oftentimes, maybe Bosnia is a bad example, but whatever. Oftentimes, this is like that's how it works. Like even when people are, in the kind of countries where if they lose the war, they might actually end up hauled before an international tribunal, right? Like a lot of the stuff, the international tribunal ends up being about inferring intent from actions, which you can certainly do in this case. I just saw the other night. Actually, a good friend of mine who lived in Israel for many years sent me this article from 972, which is a left-wing Israeli magazine, which has this really harrowing line about doctors, hospitals in Gaza performing critical medical procedures without anesthesia,
Yep.
and using only phone flashlights to see, because the electricity has been knocked out, which of course is the point of knocking out the electricity, is exactly that. I mean, you have, when you have mass injuries, I mean, this is one of the reasons why, for example, right, like 58,000 American soldiers died in Vietnam. Throughout the years in Iraq, it was only about 5,000. That, like, one of the reasons is that we've gotten much, much better over the years at saving people who might have otherwise died of their injuries. And now in Gaza, I think you could say pretty unambiguously, intentionally, this is, we're in a situation where there are mass numbers of people who, might have been saved with hospitals, with electricity, with ambulances, where the ambulance wasn't going to be bombed, coming to and from the hospital, etc., who are going to die. But then you don't even just have to infer it from actions, because you have, you quoted the lawmaker who said the second Nakba. There was actually a cabinet minister who said the same thing.
The agriculture minister said that on tape. That's readily available for you all to watch if you haven't seen it. Yeah.
The president of Israel said that, like, he poo-pooed the notion that there were innocent civilians
Yep.
in Gaza, because he said they didn't do an uprising to overthrow Hamas. And if you want to say, oh, well, okay, the president of Israel is largely ceremonial, I'll note that it's an atmosphere where he didn't have to step down for saying that, or face any heat at all, from what I can tell. You could say that the cabinet ministers who said things like this, well, they're not the most important cabinet ministers. You can, Prime Minister Netanyahu said that Hamas is Amalek, which is a reference to, one of those passages in the Bible that, like, Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins used to love to quote in the late 2000s, about when you kill Amalek, spare nobody, the women, children, suckling babes. And, I guess if you're really committed to denying this, you could say that, like, yeah, I get, yeah, but that's like not the thing about Amalek that he was referring to when he said that. But like, comes a certain point where it's like, no, look, everybody in the West who wants to defend Israel knows the script they're supposed to follow. That, you know, they know that it's like, okay, actually they're taking extraordinary care to make sure that, you know, that they're not killing civilians, and Hamas just, you know, it uses people as human shields, but, you know, they're really being as careful as they possibly could. It's a horrible tragedy that some, you know, some civilians still end up dying. But then you have all of these powerful Israeli officials who are, you know, just constantly telegraphing like explicit genocidal intent.
Yeah, I mean, look, I do care what they say. I think it's relevant, but I think what Israeli officials, along with the IDF, actually carry out, their actions matter more. And their actions have made it abundantly clear to me that they are not at all concerned about Palestinian civilians or protecting their lives. You know, it's funny, over the weekend, there was a story involving this man armed with a knife who had hostages. Okay, pretty tragic story. Officers respond. They try to bust into the home in order to free the hostages. Guys start shooting at them right away. They get out of the home. Then they call SWAT. I mean, and I thought to myself, well, the bad guy was using these humans as human shields. Why didn't we just bomb the house?
Yeah,
isn't that the right course of action? Let's bomb the house.
And that's
who cares about those hostages, right? I mean, that is what Israel would do. And then you would have American officials, including Democrats, including this Democratic administration, lining up one by one to say, Israel has a right to defend itself. The cops had a right to defend themselves. The cops had, I mean, they bombed it, of course. Why would the cops risk their lives to try to save the hostages? Why would they do that?
Yeah, and that's an instance of people actually being used as human shields. That, in other words, like there was a clear intent to like use them to make sure that, you know, that you couldn't be attacked, which is really not the case for most of what we're talking about here. Because one, if like you think that you know, if Hamas was like doing that as a strategy, I don't know why they would bother at this point, because like clearly it does not have the effect of shielding them, right? So so this claim they're using people as human shields, like, well, I mean, if they, you know, again, why would they bother? Like they like hasn't it been established like 10,000 times now, even before last month, that Israel would in fact bomb places with lots of civilians in it, you know? So like it does not have a shielding effect. But two, you're talking in almost all of these cases about things that much less clearly even fall into that category. What you're really talking about is just Hamas militants being close to civilians, which is a separate issue. I mean, that there is an obligation. You know, Norm Finkelstein was talking about his debate with Eli Lake, right? There is an obligation under international law, to the extent that you can, to move the battlefield away from civilians, and so you can fault them for, you know, for not doing that. Although it's also,
well, I mean,
it's also one of the most densely populated.
No, what are you talking about, Ben? I mean, the sprawl in this giant piece of land, the Gaza Strip. I mean, it's basically rural, right? I mean, it's so sparsely populated in some parts of Gaza. That's where Hamas should come on. I mean, look, we all know what's happening. We all know what's happening. We do.
Even in the U.S., right, which is like legitimately one of the most sprawling places that, you know, you can find on God's green earth. I mean, people who want to see, like, go on a road trip to see America or whatever, you know, like it lasts forever. There's lots of military stuff that's interspersed with civilian stuff all around the United States. I mean, I've been to Fort Benning, you know, where there's a giant military base. There are residential houses lined like right up until the gate of Fort Benning. I've been to about 1 million shopping malls that have like army recruitment centers in them. You know, that's like, it's very common in countries all over the world, you know, for there to be, you know, like the military stuff isn't carefully pre-removed way away from any sort of civilian stuff, even in a country like the United States, you know, with like where which legitimately has this massive landmass, much of which is really depopulated, etc. Never mind 25 miles by 6 miles with 2.3 million people, with 2.3 million people living in them. So I mean, this idea that it's like, well, any place within that, Hamas is awful. If there was a scenario where there was a version of the IDF that was going to actually do like careful targeted, like they were gonna like send in special ops to to try to like track down people who are involved in 10/7, I wouldn't have a problem with that, just like I wouldn't have a problem if you had a version of Hamas that was very unlike Hamas, right? That was resisting military occupation in a way where they only attacked IDF targets. I mean, in both cases, unfortunately, that's not the situation. And I think we talked earlier about how stupid it was, and really just how unforgivably stupid it was that there were people, uh, you know, there was this minority within the Western left who did obfuscate, that the point about Hamas, and that's absolutely true. But it's also like, if my government were spending millions of billions of dollars arming and funding Hamas, had like provided intel for the 10/7 attacks,
Mhm.
that American politicians were lining up to defend Hamas. They were having if there was like the member of Congress who'd been most harshly critical of Hamas was censured for it, then like under
Right.
those circumstances, I would probably be marching in anti-Hamas protests. Like that would make sense.
100%. If the entirety of the United States government, Democrats, Republicans, doesn't matter, both parties were in cahoots, supportive of Hamas and funding Hamas to the tune of literally billions of dollars a year, yeah, we would take to the streets and we would protest that. But that is not what's happening. The United States government, regardless of who is in charge, regardless of which party is in charge, all of these officials, all of these politicians, they hang their heads and they say Israel has the right to defend itself over and over and over again, regardless of what kind of regime is in charge in Israel. And right now it is a far right regime, regardless of what kind of war crimes they carry out. And to be sure, the entirety of the international community acknowledges the war crimes that Israel is carrying out as we speak, and they have in the past as well. And the US provides cover for it and continues to provide funding. And the thing that, if you really think about what all of this means long term, and I really want to invite everyone to do that, okay? Israel is not doing anything right now that actually leads to peace and safety for Israeli civilians. It is very clear to me that Netanyahu wants to expand this war to Lebanon, to Syria, as people are losing members of their families, as innocent civilians are dying left and right, as pregnant mothers are killed in the aerial bombardments, and their fetuses are literally ripped out of their wombs and placed into the hospitals, hoping that the fetuses, the babies, will survive. Think about how many people are being radicalized as we speak. And though that leads to more hostility toward Israel, more hostility toward the United States, although geographically speaking, obviously this is more of a threat for Israel, the Israeli civilians. And I say all that because what does that mean for American taxpayers? Okay, that means that as they are reproducing more extremism in that region, us, the US taxpayers, will have to continue funding the safety and defense of Israel for the rest of our lives, for the rest of our children's lives, the rest of our grandchildren's lives, even when the economic conditions on the ground for ordinary American workers continue to devolve. Okay, I'm sick of it. I am sick of it. It is not right that when it comes to Americans in America, our government gives us the middle finger or nickels and dimes the crap out of us. Okay, when it comes to our needs, endless debates. Oh, but there's a Senate parliamentarian. Oh, but there's a legislative filibuster. Okay, Americans who work hard, pay their taxes, do everything right, get the middle finger. But when it comes to funding Israel, how about another $14.3 billion?
Yeah, it's kind of amazing to think about the fact that they have national health care. But
Yeah.
but yeah. So I want to play just a little bit from your conversation from PBD. But the other point I did just want to make about the way that that people talk about this is that um, it's it is true that in like a complicated, ambiguous way, there's been like internal autonomy in Gaza. I mean, that's obviously ended now, but there had been. But the way that people talk about this as if Israel was bombing some foreign country is really strange, because if you think about examples like Saddam Hussein, gassing, Kurds in Iraq, or some of the war crimes that were committed by Assad in Syria, uh, people will without hesitation refer to that as like things that they were doing, within their own country. And it's not like in 2005 when Israel did their strategic disengagement. It's not like what that meant was that they allowed the Gazans to form an independent state, that would control its own borders and have an army and a navy, and and all of that stuff. We're talking about this tiny area of land where everything that gets in and out has been controlled by Israel, since 2005. The airspace has certainly been controlled by Israel since 2005. That long before October 7th. That they've regularly bombed it. That's like every now and again, mowing the lawn, right? So what they call it. There is certainly they don't control the borders. The Great March of Return in 2018, thousands of unarmed Palestinians were shot for getting too close to the to quote unquote their own border. This is not only nothing like an independent state. It's an area that Israel had like still maintained much more control over than these other governments in these other situations maintain control over, what we without hesitation talk about them as bombing or gassing their own country, right? That it's just really misleading the way that people talk about this as if there had been a two-state solution that was implemented in 2005.
Absolutely. And, we hear all of the justifications for the brutality that the IDF is currently carrying out in Gaza because of Hamas. But I would also invite everyone to consider the brutality that Palestinians in the West Bank have been facing as well. Not just in this current fighting, but historically speaking, they're not ruled or governed by Hamas. They're governed by the Palestinian Authority, and the Israeli government had absolutely no problem with the brutality and the murders carried out by Israeli settlers in the West Bank. So, Israeli government doesn't really give Palestinian civilians a lot of hope or even any incentive to live peacefully, okay? Because of the fact that even when they do everything right, even when they have the Palestinian Authority work alongside the Israeli government to maintain peace, the Israeli government does nothing to punish the settlers who carry out brutal acts against Palestinians in the West Bank. It's just, yeah.
I mean, not just historically, but earlier this year, there has, like, obviously it's gotten much worse since 10/7, but even before that, this year was like the worst year ever for essentially settler pogroms against Palestinian communities in the West Bank. I believe there's an area that I believe takes up about 10% of the West Bank that has been almost completely cleansed of Palestinian inhabitants earlier this year, right? Before October 7th, which is also why I think that that like sort of treating it as if the situation was that everything was fine, and then there was this Hamas attack out of nowhere and everything's a response to that. It's like, well, no, Hamas attack certainly wasn't justified. They killed, lots of many civilians. have a friend of a friend who's whose dad, pretty sure, was one of those people, was one of those people who's killed. But they have, but there is, but this is part of a cycle of
Mhm.
attacks and counterattacks and massacres and counter massacres that has been going on for a long while. And I do think, and this is the last part before we watch the few minutes we're going to watch, just because they have, that it is, there is something like that really gets lost in all of this about that larger context, right?
Mhm.
Um that what has existed in Israel, certainly since 1967. I mean, we can talk about stuff before that, but certainly since 1967, is that on the West Bank, certainly, you have what I think under any other circumstances we would be comfortable using words like apartheid to describe. That you have Israeli settlers who are treated for every legal purpose as living in Israel. They vote in Israeli elections. If they commit crimes, they're tried in regular Israeli civilian courts. And minutes away, right in the same cities, you have Palestinians who are who obviously cannot vote in Israeli elections. Who, if they commit a crime, they're tried in Israeli military courts. And that itself is something that requires constant violence to enforce, because of course, because how could it not, right? And we could talk about what we would consider to be acceptable or reasonable solutions. I mean, if I had my way, I know that this is like just completely off the map of mainstream discourse, but if I had my way, I everybody who lives there would just get citizenship, and you just have a multi-ethnic democracy, and that would be it, right? I think that would be ideal. If I don't particularly like, I don't particularly like ethnic partition as it's played out, all over the world in a variety of situations. If you want to tell me, okay, Ben, that sounds nice, but it's never going to happen, fine, right?
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
can have,
I
if
don't think it's ever gonna happen. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
it's just hard to conceive
it
of a
is,
situation in which you can have a one state
yeah,
democratically run solution. The hatred, disdain, racism, all of that is just so deeply ingrained at this point. I just don't see it ever happen. Like when you literally have prominent members of a government calling for like a nuclear bomb to drop on the Gaza Strip. I don't see a
yeah,
peaceful one state solution as an option,
yeah,
unfortunately.
which is very unfortunate, because that still
Yeah.
leaves the million ethnic Palestinians, who live within the Green Line, dealing with that. Uh, but um, but yeah, I mean, right now, unfortunately, two state also seems very hard to imagine. But if things started to change, so it became possible, I wouldn't make the perfect the enemy of the good. I would welcome that as like, the most justice that was sort of possible, under current political conditions. If at least these people in the West Bank and Gaza, who've spent 56 years being a citizen of nothing, right, can at least be a citizen of something, right? But however you feel about that, right? What would sort of count as the most just solution? What's the most practical solution? What's most imaginable? Um, the reason I wanted to foreground that is just that I think you can't sort of have a reasonable version of this situation where that issue doesn't even come up, and you sort of pretend that Israel is Canada, and like,
Yeah.
and this is just like, and this is just this like pure malice that like came in from a separate dimension or something like that, and it doesn't have a context, it doesn't have a history.
Right. what happened on October 7th didn't happen in a vacuum, as much as the Israeli government wants you to believe that it did, as much as the US government wants you to believe that it happened in a vacuum. It didn't. That does not go to justify what Hamas did. I really want to reiterate that. But you do need to understand the broader context in order to actually find reasonable solutions. And I don't think that that's really happening right now. So anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Want to play just a few minutes from this.
Okay. First of all, I think it's wrong. I don't think those civilians deserve this. Okay. The majority of the civilians living in the Gaza Strip weren't even born at the time that Hamas was voted in. Okay. Most of them, half of them are under the age of 18.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So the point that I'm trying to make is there is a way of supporting Israel, which I believe we should do, right, without justifying what they're currently doing in the Gaza Strip, right? We should provide them with the intel they need. We should provide them with the weapons they need, with the condition that they're going to carry out these operations, special ops, as opposed to bombing the crap out of the Gaza Strip, killing all of these innocent civilians from a remote location. I think that's wrong.
Anna, with all due respect, you're sort of falling for the mainstream narrative that you talk about railing against. So we all saw the story about the hospital that was bombed by Israel. How could you do this? How could you kill innocent civilians? The New York Times basically is now retracting their statement. Yeah, it turns out it was the Islamic Jihad with a failed rocket. I can assure you of this.
Hold on.
Nobody
that is not definitive, number one.
Yeah, it's still not.
That is not definitive,
Even the
number
Wall
one.
Street Journal
Okay,
came out and said
that is one example.
Okay.
Even if I give you that argument and it is proven without any doubt that it was Hamas that did that, that is one incident in a situation where 1.1 million Palestinians are being told to evacuate their homes. As they're being evacuated to the part of the Gaza Strip where they're gonna be safe, that area gets bombed.
Yep.
Okay.
So let me ask you.
So earlier at the beginning of the stream, I brought up that when we were texting while you were in the air on your way to do this interview, you know, when it came up that you were in the air was because I had tried to text you like an image. You were like, oh, the image won't load on my phone. You know, the airplane Wi-Fi isn't good enough. And the image that I was sending you was from the New York Times on this very hospital bombing that they had, that the New York Times had done this analysis that showed that this video that was being widely circulated, that's actually one of the, you know, not the only, but one of the main pieces of evidence for saying, oh, this was a failed Islamic Jihad rocket, that the New York Times had done an analysis on that saying, no, I don't think that's actually what the video shows, right? So it's still, you know, it's still very murky what happened. I mean, I wouldn't, you know, confidently pronounce about, you know, anything that's like disputed, you know, while fog of war, you're not going to be able to get people in for like a real independent investigation, you know, all of that stuff. But it was just kind of funny to me watching this part, you know, because we'd had this conversation and it's like, no, that, you know, your information is out of date.
Yeah, totally. And thank you for bringing that up, because even today, you know, anyone who says, no, it was an Islamic Jihad rocket, it wasn't the IDF, they're full of it. I don't know if they know they're full of it, right? Maybe they're just consuming media that is far more generous to Israel and the IDF, but it is not known yet. We still don't know. Channel 4 in the UK has done a really good job at kind of investigating other elements of evidence that were released by the IDF in regard to that hospital bombing. But I want to be clear about something, okay? I think it would be a mistake to just be hyper-focused on this hospital bombing, because fact of the matter is the IDF has taken responsibility for bombing dozens of other hospitals. The Israeli government has taken responsibility for refusing fuel to these hospitals, thus making them non-operational, non-functional, okay? Which, I mean, they're doing an aerial bombardment. All of these innocent civilians are not only dying, but those who somehow survive, have serious injuries, and need medical attention, but they can't get the medical attention because none of those machines in those hospitals are going to work without power. The Israeli government knows that. So it's kind of like, missing the forest for the trees. It's like, okay, if you want, we can hyper focus on this one hospital bombing, but that does not take away from the other hospital bombings that the IDF has taken responsibility for, and the other acts of brutality and the other war crimes that the IDF is currently carrying out. We can talk about that too.
Yeah, and that point about the intent behind bombing all of these other hospitals, behind denying fuel, etc., goes to the next thing the host is going to ask you.
A very direct question. Do you think Israel wants to kill innocent civilians?
I do.
You think Israel genuinely wants to?
I do.
What evidence do you have of that?
The evidence is they are refusing to do special operations and instead are relying on bombing areas where they know civilians are at, and then they'll turn around and say, "Well, Hamas is using them as human shields."
So if someone was shooting at you, you don't have kids, right?
If an armed man grabbed a family member of yours, do you have kids?
No, I don't.
Oh, do you have? Okay, your mother. You talked about your mother. If an armed gunman grabbed your mother, had a gun to her head, okay, and he is confronted by the authorities, by law enforcement. And law enforcement, they just decide, you know what? We're not going to negotiate. We're not going to do anything. We're just going to shoot the hell out of both of them. And then they come to you and say, well, your mother, was a human shield. Would you accept that argument?
That's not the question, though.
Would you accept that argument?
You're making up a random story that my mother is held captive.
That was an amazing moment. It really was, because look, I don't know what he actually thinks.
Sure.
So I don't want to put words in his mouth. I want to be fair to him. But to me, that moment, it felt like, at least, that Israeli civilians, their humanity is recognized and taken seriously, whereas the lives and humanity of Palestinian civilians hasn't really been thought about or considered. Like the acceptance of that argument that Hamas uses them as human shields. And so, yeah, of course, we're going to go ahead and bomb anyway. Like, there wasn't a moment where, I think people who accept that argument have stopped to actually think about what they're saying and what that means, and maybe take a moment to empathize, take a moment to think about it in your own context. Turn the tables, just turn the tables. If Hamas bombed a hospital in Israel and they didn't have the Iron Dome, they didn't have the ability to protect themselves. And that's the other thing that always gets left out, right?
Yeah.
Oh, well, Hamas is, using rockets against Israel. Okay, that's awful. I totally acknowledge that's awful. But this is a lopsided war in which the military capability and the defense capability, thanks to the Iron Dome, makes it so Israel has a far easier time defending itself, okay? Whereas they don't have that kind of capability in Gaza. But nonetheless, let's say they don't have the Iron Dome, and Hamas uses that justification to bomb a hospital in Israel because they say that Israeli officials are using, those patients as human shields. Would they accept that argument? Of course they wouldn't. I wouldn't accept that argument. No one should accept that argument. That is an insane argument.
Yeah. When people, the point you're making here, and the refusal to contemplate it, by the way, footnote, this is why I hate it when even some left media people who I usually like will say in debates, "Oh, I don't deal in hypotheticals," or stuff like that. It's like no, you should, right? Because the point of thinking about hypotheticals is to establish consistency, right? What are the principles that you're using to think about this stuff? But when people are actually being used as human shields, then nobody normally says or should say, "Oh, well, okay, then go nuts." Right? That's fine, right? That's shoot the hosts, shoot the host, like shoot the guy who grabbed the host mom through the mom, right? Go for it, right? Like when people are actually being used as human shields, and we think, okay, well, we have a responsibility because they are humans, right? We have a responsibility to take extraordinary measures to protect their lives. That if somebody, if an actual, mass shooter was like shooting up a school, and and he like grabbed two kids and either arm, and the cops had like sprayed gunfire at him, knowing that they'd kill the two kids. Trust me, later on there would be a lot of hearings where people would be held to account for that decision. I mean, the cop would
Totally.
like definitely definitely lose their job for that. They would be
I mean, why didn't the Uvalde police just do a drone strike on the school when there was an active shooter there? Why didn't they just drop a bomb? Like, I don't understand. I mean, the active shooter's the bad guy. Yeah, a lot of innocent kids are gonna die, but you'll get the shooter, right? I mean, it's just such a dumb argument, and it's such an inhumane argument, and the fact that it just gets regurgitated over and over and over again as if it's not an inhumane argument drives me crazy.
Yeah. All right, let's watch just a little bit more and then wrap up.
Hamas using Palestinians as human shields is not a justification to indiscriminately bomb the hell out of that region, knowing full well that the majority of people who are going to end up dying are not Hamas militants who are underground in the tunnels. Okay. It's the innocent civilians who are going to lose their lives. And the flippant behavior that I see from the West in regard to all of those innocent people losing their lives disgusts me. Okay, seeing people having to vacate their homes, everything that they've known, being forced to leave the land that they have. That is exactly what happened to Armenians. That is exactly what happened during the genocide. And the fact that the United States is just willy-nilly providing cover for that behavior absolutely disgusts me. Israel has a right to defend itself. How it defends itself is where we should have that conversation. Sending special ops in to get Hamas, hell yeah, go get them. But the idea that all of these innocent kids should lose their lives as a result of this, I don't believe it. I will never support it. And in the long run, that is going to make Israeli civilians less safe, not more safe. It breeds more extremism. And by the way, it's dragging us into a broader war. Okay. You have the Arab world like ready to go. And you have Israel under the leadership of Netanyahu acting incredibly belligerent, doing airstrikes in freaking Lebanon. Okay, talking about going to war in Iran. We're going to bring in all of these Arab countries. You think the United States is going to stay out of that? Hell no. We're going to be dragged into more forever wars. But I just think it's so destructive, so stupid. We're not thinking critically and strategically about how to help our ally Israel while also preventing the reproduction of more extremism.
Yeah, the extremism is never going to go away.
It's not
That's the foundation of what Hamas is.
It's not going to go away.
In their founding doctrine,
let me tell you something.
Their entire doctrine is to eliminate every Jew that lives in Israel.
Let me explain.
Do you acknowledge the founding doctrine of what Hamas is? The annihilation of all Jews?
I hate Hamas.
Okay.
Let me be clear.
So the question is, how do we annihilate them?
Well, you can't find.
I need you guys to understand.
Nobody wants to see innocent.
This was a very frustrating moment. Yeah, because it's like this unwillingness to accept this is a fact. We know this based on the war crimes the American government committed in Iraq, in Afghanistan. Those war crimes and the slaughter of civilians radicalized people in that region and created more extremism and it didn't solve anything. Okay. And that's the point that I was trying to make there. And I don't know if we're going to watch any more of it, but I say one thing that I think we should listen to real quick, because this is, I think, something that most people can relate to, can resonate with.
Yeah. But yeah. So we'll do that. I did just want to say a few things. So, one of them is that all of this stuff, about the founding charter of Hamas, which is all true enough. I mean, I would point out there are other times that that they have they did a more recent charter not that many years ago, that they that was very
I hate when people bring that up. I don't care about their more recent charter. They carried out the slaughter of Israeli civilians. But
I guess to me, if you're going to talk about the charter, if the charter is going to be the be all end all, right? Then like it's a little bit misleading to only bring this up. I mean, that they like the founding platform of the Likud party that is currently in charge of Israel, their charter if you will, right, says that there should be exclusive Israeli control of everything from the Jordan River to the to the Mediterranean Sea. So, I mean, if you're going to if you're going to make this charter-based argument, I think that that's a little bit more complicated than he's portraying it as being. Now, I don't disagree with what you just said. That um, you should care less about like what any group's founding documents are than how they act in the present. I think
Yep.
that's true all around, right?
Yes.
That's what we should that's what we should care should care the most about. But then the next question would be, okay, well, what's the context in which that happened, and what's the sort of realistic way of making it less likely
Mhm.
rather than more likely to happen in the future? And when he talks, like, he's using this language about, oh, how do you annihilate Hamas? This is also very strange to me because, it just seems like, looking around the world, how many counterinsurgency campaigns in how many different places have the announced goal of making sure that some like terrorist or guerrilla or whatever group ceases to exist? And how many of
Mhm.
them actually lead to the result that that group just ceases to exist?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, also consider that the leadership of Hamas isn't even in Gaza. The Israeli government knows that.
Yeah, they're
They're
all
in
they're
Qatar.
yeah,
So what they're doing right now, it's so important to really accept this because, again, they can say whatever they're saying, but look at their actions.
yeah,
Their actions are not rooting out Hamas. This is a retaliatory effort and an effort to ethnically cleanse Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. Netanyahu himself said that Israel will be in control of Gaza, will provide security for Gaza. That's how he worded it.
yeah,
Indefinitely. It's so obvious, guys. And I mean, I'm saying this to your audience. I'm pretty sure,
sure.
we're all on the same boat. We all agree. But it is amazing to me. The only thing I can think of is maybe some people are consuming propaganda that's very pro-Israel,
Yeah,
and they're not really seeing what we're seeing. But I don't know how you can see the military operations, listen to what the prime minister himself says on national television, see the confirmation of the documents indicating that they want to ethnically cleanse Palestinians from Gaza, and still not accept what is currently happening on the ground there. This is not about fighting Hamas. This is not about erasing Hamas. This is about erasing the Palestinian people from the Gaza Strip. And you see the same brutality. Well, not the exact same. They're not doing
yeah,
aerial bombardments in the West Bank, but the brutality that Palestinians in the West Bank are facing as well makes it clear to me that this isn't just about Hamas. This is about getting rid of Palestinians. And the fact that our government, with our taxpayer money and our weapons, is supporting what's happening really does disgust me as an Armenian. And real quick, one other thing I'll say.
yeah,
One of the justifications that the Turks gave for the unbelievable, brutal acts, war crimes, genocide they carried out against Armenians in 1915 was that, well, Armenia, along with Russia, carried out atrocities against the Turks, right? It's just same. It's like so similar. It blows my mind. And, people will come at me and be like, oh, Anna thinks that she can call it genocide because she's Armenian. She thinks she's an expert on genocide because she's Armenian. When you come from a people who suffered a genocide and then lived in a country, a huge part of the diaspora lives in a country that forever refused to even acknowledge the genocide because of their NATO ally, Turkey. You hear stories about it throughout your entire life, okay? Regularly, about how fathers saw the Turks coming and were so terrified about what would happen to their daughters that they killed their daughters and then killed themselves, okay? Those kinds of stories. You hear about all of it throughout your entire life. So yeah, pardon me if it's offensive to hear the word genocide in the context of what Israel is carrying out in the Gaza Strip. But I can say without a shadow of a doubt that what they're carrying out in the Gaza Strip is genocide. And if you were disgusted by the genocide denialist in regard to what happened to Armenians, you should be disgusted with yourself if you are repeating the same denialism in regard to what's happening to the Palestinians right now.
Yeah. And that point about Netanyahu saying that Israel would have permanent responsibility for security in Gaza, does bring us back to what we were talking about earlier about one state and two state solutions. Because if you want to say that you're, a democracy, which, in many, like, honestly, even within the Green Line is getting more dubious all the time. If you read some of the stories about, about crackdowns on there, about, people, people being arrested for like social media statuses and, things like that. Something that I keep thinking about the last few days is I think about, the Jewish side of my family, when it was time to get the fuck out of Tsarist Russia, there's probably, there's like probably a timeline where they migrated to Palestine instead of here. And one of the many reasons I'm grateful that didn't happen is that if I were a citizen of the only democracy in the Middle East, TM, then I most certainly would have been arrested for some of the articles I've been writing about this.
For sure.
But if you do want to make any kind of claim to being a democracy, well, look, if you're saying, oh, we're temporarily occupying something, but then we're going to withdraw, right? Then, okay, that's one thing. But if you say you're going to have permanent security responsibility for some place, in other words, your military is going to have a permanent presence there, then, you're going to be permanently ruling over people, then I don't understand how you can be a democracy and say we're going to do that permanently, but also the people who live there aren't going to be Israeli citizens.
Exactly. But remember, Ben, whatever you do, don't call it an occupation, because if Israel does it, can't call it an occupation. Yeah. In any other context, you could call that occupation, but not in the context of exactly.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
The civilians killed nobody, including the IDF.
If a government wiped out my entire family, I have nothing left to live for, and I'm real angry. Okay, that is a dangerous combination, and that is exactly what is being bred right now as we speak, as entire families are getting wiped out, civilian families in the Gaza Strip. I totally get that, the discourse in the United States has essentially dehumanized these people, but at the end of the day, they're innocent people in a terrible situation, and they don't deserve the absolute hell that they're dealing with right now, the death and destruction that they're dealing with right now. I want a peaceful two-state solution. This ain't the way to get it.
Yeah, we are in full alignment, full agreement that we want to see zero civilian deaths. Nobody wants that. And I can assure you, the IDF, the Mossad, nobody wants civilian deaths. But we're looking for solutions here. If I'm...
Yeah, it was just, I wanted to personalize it because I can't imagine losing every family member. I can't imagine. I would want revenge.
Yeah, but you see people all the time. So it's like, oh, there's this that 972 article from Israel that I mentioned earlier. They said one of their Palestinian contributors, they had 20 members of their family were killed. I cannot wrap my head around what the experience would be of having 20 members of my family die. Right? I mean, never mind, being murdered, but like just all dying at the same time. I cannot even imagine what that would do to me. And then if they were murdered, like if somebody somebody killed them, then I can't. I mean, yes, sure. I mean, I think that I think anybody who says that in that situation, like that version of them wouldn't be more likely to do things like like join Hamas, right? That there's like just has not actually made that leap of imagination, because of course you would, of course anybody would. I mean, there's like the same reason if your family was killed by terrorists, you'd be more likely to join the army because
Totally.
because human beings are primed to, like, yeah, we're going to, you're going to want to make them pay for killing all those people that you love. And unless there's a complete genocide and you just don't let anybody left, if you still have a substantial Palestinian situation, a Palestinian population exist at the end of this.
Mhm.
And even just in the West Bank, by the way, even if you wiped out everybody in Gaza, it's not like people on the West Bank don't have like cousins who lived in Gaza, right? That's
Right.
there would, if there's still any kind of substantial Palestinian population left, of course this would lead to more, to more terrorism instead of less terrorism in the long run. I don't understand how anybody could possibly think otherwise, but it seems like what the host is relying on here is just this sense that people have that, well, hey, we all think we're good people, right? Well, the Israelis seem much more like us, culturally and whatever than the Palestinians. So yeah, they're like, they're people like us. They're good people. So it's crazy to say that they would want there to be all of these mass deaths in Gaza, even though every single thing that they're doing is engineered to bring that about. Is
Mhm.
that we're going to be flattening apartment blocks. We're going to be ordering 1.1 million people to leave their homes and then bombing the convoys of people who are following the order. We're going to be bombing Greek Orthodox Church that people are sheltering in. That including, numerous relatives of a former U.S. Congressman, Justin Amash. And I've got to say, if a recent former U.S. Congressman had like lost dozens of relatives on 10/7, I think that would have been a bigger story.
Oh, big time. Absolutely. Yep.
Cutting off water, cutting off electricity, bombing numerous hospitals and taking responsibility, making sure that there's no electricity at the hospitals, making sure that
Shutting down their telecommunications. Like, I mean,
can't call ambulances,
right.
bombing ambulances when they do come, which by the way, even if an ambulance is carrying a wounded Hamas fighter, that is a thing that ambulances are supposed to do, right?
Mhm.
In like World War I, World War II, where they're like those Red Cross things that it's like, oh, you don't bomb that, it has a Red Cross on it. It's like, yes, typically carrying wounded soldiers is like a thing that they would
Right.
be doing. That's fine, right? You don't get to bomb an ambulance because some of the wounded people in it are enemies of yours, right? That's
Yeah.
still supposed to be sacrosanct. But the fact that they're even doing that openly, taking responsibility for it, kind of says everything. When he says, I promise you that they're not doing it, he's just saying in his view of the world, this is so unthinkable that he just cannot process it as a possibility, even when the evidence of both action and stated intent is just mounting all around him.
Yeah. And look, I'll say this and then I got to go. But what I keep hearing in regard to the Israeli side and their framing of this war is that this is a war where people get to choose between civilization and barbarism. Okay. And obviously, they're saying this as if Israel represents civilization, right? They're the sophisticated democracy in the region. But then they also simultaneously will say that they reject the rules of engagement. The rules of engagement have changed so much since World War II. Okay. And you can't, on one hand, claim to be this civilized society that has progressed while carrying out barbaric acts against the Palestinian people. It's that simple.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Thank you so much, Anna.
Thanks,
Talk to you
Ben.
soon. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.